I don't know how in the world we pulled this off, but we have Don Golden here with us. Wow. Well, at least Zooming with us. Amazing. Don, thank you so much for coming and being willing to share with us today. It is a truly an honor to have you. Wow, my goodness. I wish like I could get your autograph right now, but you're on Zoom. But thank you for being here.
Larry, you're flattering me, but I'll take it. Thank you. It's great to be with you. I like your voice, Larry. You know,
What?
I like a smooth Southern voice that's marked by intelligence and doing good work, and that's you, Larry. So I'm glad to be with you.
Yeah, I'm so glad that we have you on the show. You already made me feel better. Thank you so much for being on this podcast.
Yeah, my
Hey,
pleasure.
Don, you're an incredible, seriously an incredible leader. Someone that's not afraid of controversy and someone that's not afraid to speak the truth. And boy, those are rare ingredients to today. Maybe not so much about controversy, but certainly about truth. And you do that, and so beautifully and so articulately. And we've talked about that earlier in our intro. The works that you have participated in, you're traveling, but I want to take some time and I want to just learn about you. What makes up Don? How in the world did you become who you are today? So if we could, let's go back and let's think about. And I want you to take us really maybe through a day in the life of, if you will. Go back to your childhood with me. You're 6, 7, 8 years old. Tell us where you grew up and what was life like for you back then.
Oh, that's it's a fascinating opportunity to do that. Maybe just to set the context of where my story is headed. Let me just state kind of my living purpose right now. My sole purpose that I
Mm.
work on now is that I connect investors, businesses, and philanthropists to the knowledge and networks that they need to make the greatest impact that they can.
Mm.
That's what I do with my life, with my work at Just Capital Quotient, our consultancy. And so when I think back of the journey that led me to this work, and going back, all the way to my childhood in Southern Ohio, rural Ohio, growing up in Claremont County. When I look at that significance of who I am today and what I'm doing is Claremont County, Ohio, outside of Cincinnati, is the farthest west county of Appalachia as delineated during the New Deal. So when the
Wow.
New Deal was dividing up the needs of America and placing people index, Appalachia was obviously an area of focus, and the county that I grew up in was the furthest west. You don't think of Cincinnati, Ohio really as Appalachia. You don't think of Southern Ohio necessarily as Appalachia, but technically it is. And my grandfather was a sharecropper there. He moved
Wow.
from Kentucky. He came and I found on Ancestry.com the 1940 census of Goshen, Ohio, where I'm from. And the only thing I learned, well, which is profound, is his occupation was farmer. His house value was $6, and his income was zero. He
Oh
was a
wow.
sharecropper. He
Yeah.
lived in a shack, and worked for that place to live and to grow his own food. And then both my parents became factory workers at Newtone in Cincinnati, which is the first company to mass produce electronic doorbells. And that their jobs really lifted them out of poverty into what I grew up thinking was the middle class. I didn't realize I was one, generation away from severe poverty.
Wow.
And so what I would point to at that age in the very early 70s, we were coming out of that moment in human history, what Thomas Piketty, the French economist, He's the economist of inequality. He's the one that looked most thoroughly at inequality throughout all of modern history, and formally studying it. The 1950s and 60s and coming into the 70s was the most equitous time economically in human history. More wealth was spread out more broadly, not just in America, but in Europe and even in other places, because colonialism came to an end then around the world. So I grew up in Southern Ohio, thinking I was, part of the solid working to middle class, not recognizing the dependency on manufacturing, not seeing what was about to come with a change in the economy, the diminishing of that same place now is struggling because manufacturing jobs have left. The number one and two job providers in Southern Ohio is the military and Walmart. Gone are those halcyon days of manufacturing. So I grew up kind of unaware of the blessings I was a beneficiary to, but also someone who was by fate going to move into the realm of global human development and find myself traveling in 80 countries and engaging at a very deep level in some of the most troubled, poorest places on the planet, and beginning this journey of helping other people, flourish even amidst challenges. So there's some thoughts about early days growing up in Southern Ohio.
Well, amazing, and even through that journey that you've just taken us through, your passion is so evident. You have done such a tremendous work around relief and caregiving and economic help. Well, way more than that. Your passion is so obvious, and you are so traveled. But let's go back. So here you are in Ohio. Okay, you're a child. Your parents are both working in the manufacturing world. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Well, think about something that intrinsically you just like you said, you had no idea that things would change so drastically in your mind. This what level am I? Am I, my mid level, upper level of poverty? I'm sure as a child that just didn't happen back in those days. Certainly not like the polarization that we see today. But you're there. You're growing up. Do you have siblings? Do you not? Where are you? And what is something intrinsically that your parents kind of taught you and brought you through?
Yeah. I was the youngest of four. And the critical factor in my life at that age and growing up was faith. And the role that faith played in shaping values, worldview, focus. And so, but also a kind of tension within faith. We grew up in sort of a country fundamentalism, Pentecostalism that was very, very, was hardcore, basically don't drink, don't smoke, all these lists of don'ts.
Right.
Which somehow I think would often cloud the beauty of religion, of Christianity, of the gospel. But I still was able to see that central belief that there is a God, that this God loves us and me, that God has a plan. And so actually at a very young age, I felt these inner callings of faith and ministry and a desire to serve. And actually, I remember seeing probably one of the earliest versions of a television commercial promoting relief, some kind of relief. I mean, it would have been in the very early days. So maybe Kampuchea, I remember, once the name for Cambodia. I remember there was a big, some kind of benefit on television, and they were showing these pictures of really, emaciated children. And I remember everyone else that in my life witnessing those pictures would always want to turn the television off. And I had this compassionate, passionate draw, like, wait a minute, that's happening, that cannot that cannot be acceptable. And you're telling me there's a God who loves the world, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. I'm going to think he cares about that. So I felt this very early draw
Wow.
to human suffering, human need, and attached to it in a way that somehow was very different from everybody around me.
That is amazing that early in your life you had that passion. That wasn't necessarily. I know it has grown and developed and matured, but boy, intrinsically you had that passion.
Mm.
And I remember the same thing. We would, when missionaries would come in and show us the slides of things,
Yes.
many times we just check out. Oh boy,
Right.
another mission. Oh wow. Or when those pictures came that were just atrocious to look at on the commercials or whatever, the thing
Yeah.
to do was turn away or get yourself busy and not. But you were locked in. How in the world could this be? What were your parents and your siblings, because you were the baby, right? You were the baby
That's
of the
right.
family.
Yeah. Yep.
So what was their response to your passion?
Well, when I first remember a response was, and you mentioned missionaries, and this country church that we went to. I don't ever remember a missionary coming to our church, but it was our church was based as a denomination in Jellicoe, Tennessee. So there comes the Appalachian route. So every
Yes.
summer we would go to what they call the assembly, and it was a camp meeting, big tent outside in Jellicoe, Tennessee. If you ever travel down I-75, you go across the Jellicoe Mountains, literally right there. Uh, and it seems to me that there were 30,000 people. There was probably 600, I don't know, but it was a massive
Yeah.
meeting that we would go to every year. And one year they had missionaries, or actually even ministers from India. And I was mesmerized. I mean, I hung on every word. And at the end, they gave, the old fashioned altar call. I believe somebody's calling some of you into ministry.
Right.
And before my family, my mother, my grandmother, and maybe one or two of my sisters was there. The next thing they know, little Donnie, they called me Donnie, was had slipped out of the aisle and was standing on the stage with these missionaries with about six others, and they were laying hands on me and praying and sending me out into the mission field. And it became
Great.
actually a seminal moment, even though it was.
Mm,
When I look back on it, it's kind of, it would be like a movie scene. It would be so foreign to my own
that is
experience
awesome.
now. But
Mm,
at that time, there what happened when they were talking about need, opportunity in the globe, and an invitation. They didn't ask me to ask somebody, they asked me. And as a
mm.
very young boy, I think I might have been 10 or 12 then, I got up and went, stood up on the stage. They laid hands, and I took that as this is what I'm called to do. And I've actually never backed away from that. It's only grown and taken shape and taken form, but it was a very real and very powerful encounter for
Wow.
this young lad.
What a milestone moment in your life. Even in that fundamentalist type setting, God put that passion in you, and you have
Mhm.
pursued that
Exactly.
for your entire
Yeah,
life.
that's
So
right.
move us forward a bit. You're an adolescence. You're a teenage guy now, trying to figure things out. You're in high school, looking at pursuing this passion. What was that like, and how did you decide where you were going, as maybe in college and that kind of thing? How did you make those calls?
Yeah. Um, I fundamentalism is actually part of the story, because I came to recognize its limitations, and even I'd have to say kind of the violence that's inherent in
Hmm.
fundamentalism, that's exclusionary, that it's that it's fear-inducing, um, and that it obscures the power of life uh, that can be unleashed
Yes.
in following your religious tradition in its essence and its spirit,
Mm.
as I came to do more and more. And when I was in college, I thought I would go into ministry. I thought I would go into, I wanted to follow this dream, but I enrolled in Bible college, moved from rural Ohio, uh, and found myself in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And after a couple of years in college, I could just the passion was waning, and I just didn't see the connection between this study I was doing. And so a friend of mine had become a missionary in Vienna, Austria, and he was kind of a mentor of mine. And he was working with refugees, this is 1989, coming out of Eastern Europe just prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I was sharing my frustrations with him in letters. Remember back in those days when you wrote on pieces of paper and you put them in
Yes.
envelopes and people
Wow.
carried them? It's a strange.
It's
That was
archaic,
back when
but
we had bones in our noses. And I was talking with him about this, and so he called me one day and said, "Hey, do you have any money?" I said, "Yeah, I have money for my next semester." He said, "Why don't you just come here instead?" So I was like, "Yeah." So I dropped out of college. I bought a one-way ticket to Vienna, Austria, but I didn't know. I thought Vienna was in Italy. I didn't know nothing about the world. And I bought a one-way ticket to Vienna, thinking, I
yes.
don't know, Vienna, Siena, I don't know. He lives in Austria, but for some reason I'm flying to Vienna. Anyway, that's how much I knew about the world. And that experience, even though probably every parent's nightmare for their child, I just did it. Again, didn't ask anyone. And he worked with refugees. He worked at it was a place called the Oasis. It's actually quite well known among. It's got quite a history because of its service to refugees over now decades in just south of Vienna, Austria. Any given evening, there would be as many as 35 different people groups. So I enrolled in the University of Vienna to study German, and I volunteered at this cafe. And my mind was blown, going from kind of an isolated community without much of a broad worldview to, every day I walked through the park, Fotiefkirche Park next to the University of Vienna, and I would pass Sigmund Freud's house, his apartment where he did his groundbreaking, world-changing
Yep.
analyses. And, and I would pay $2 and go to hear Mozart's Magic Flute performed at the Opera House. My mind, and I found myself incredibly curious about everything, all these different people groups. I started studying, why are Albanians wired the way they are? What is Kosovo? What is this Albanian part of Yugoslavia? I went from knowing nothing about the world to taking a deep dive into, why are Nigerians coming here? What's about the nature? Why are what's happening in Ghana that would be leading people to be political exiles, or Liberia, which was a brutal war at the time? It was just incredible. And it just lit a fire in me to understand the world, understand worldview, understand faith. It made me question, so I'm going to heaven and they're all going to hell because I was born here and have this faith and have ascribed to these propositions and they haven't. What kind of God does that? It forced me to dig deeper into what my faith was about.
Wow.
And to understand other faiths. And that was another really important period of change for me.
Oh yeah, yet another milestone. So now,
Indeed.
you actually immersed yourself. You experienced it. You didn't just hear about it. You didn't just read about it. You didn't just study.
That's right.
You immersed yourself in that culture and found yourself intrigued. Now, while you're doing that, you're there. You're a young man. You're having all these new stimuli, hitting you at one time. Is your passion still there for those who are underserved?
Then it just blew up, and travel. I took every opportunity to travel around the world. I was sent to Yugoslavia during the war and did research for the agency I was with, confronting war up front. I entered into Romania and Hungary and Czech when it was still Czechoslovakia as soon as it was possible to travel into. I drove a a van full of medical supplies to Italy and boarded a ferry with a truck and took it to Albania days after Albania opened after years of being a closed country. So I was just totally immersed in history. This history was unfolding in this, this place on the planet. And, I went from Southern Ohio, not knowing where Vienna was, to being in the center of, a really unique time. And my calling simply deepened to keep going with this work.
So help us to understand at this point, and this may be I'm going to chase a rabbit from what we're talking about, but I have to know this because you're immersed, you're doing all these things, you're in the middle of a war, you're over here doing this when a country just opened. And was there a time you ever thought about your life, and did you feel like your life was in danger on any of these adventures that you found yourself participating in?
Yeah, in the general sense, the only thing I thought about my life was that God had brought me out of a, when I look back in southern rural Ohio, the things that matter to me, it was hard to find them present. There was a kind of fundamentalist religion, there were cars, there were, sports, and those were not, I didn't have the money for cars, I didn't have the gifts for sports. So there wasn't really a path for me. So finding this connection between faith, learning, and working for human good, in that sense, it just felt like climbing a ladder of success, in the sense that I'm doing what I get to do. I get to do what I want to do. But I do remember encountering how frightening war is, how all-consuming it is, how brutal. I stayed in a hotel, a UN hotel, a hotel that was being used by the UN, and I saw atrocious photographies. A war photographer had something you would never see anywhere except in a war zone. Basically, a showing of war photography, and the brutality, human brutality at its most vicious. And actually, because our work was faith related, I saw churches in a new light. Churches that 2 years before would have maybe been arguing about the color of the carpet and whether they should pave the parking lot, were now dealing with issues of ethnic cleansing, where I was invited by a pastor because one member, the Serbs, had fled Croatia, and so another church member took over the apartment. Well, that's our apartment now. And then that Serb family came back, and they were having it out. Well, you don't deserve this home. You're a Serb, and we've cleansed Croatia of Serbs. And this is a church. So I was taken by the pastor inside a living room that had 2 sets of furniture, listening to 2 Christians argue about whether one was cleansed or not and who owns their apartment. So I saw the church's fundamental role in reconciling human brokenness and human relationships is visceral and material in this reality. And so I actually from there, I moved to Britain. I lived in England for 5 years, and I did a dissertation on the role of the church and basically its role in healing the world. What was the biblical design for this church? Because I don't think it was what it looks like now, which is a building on the corner where you go on Sunday, wear your good clothes, and then go about your life. Somehow this group of humans are supposed to put the world back together. They have a fundamental role that I think has been lost. So I did my dissertation on that topic based on my experiences in Yugoslavia during the war.
Amazing. So what happened, Don, to Ohio, your family, to that? What happened to those people who knew you before you had this experience? Now you're on this journey, you're thinking differently, your faith has grown, but perhaps not in the way that you were raised in the fundamentalist community, right? Talk to us a little bit about the dynamics that you experienced from those back in the States who knew you and loved you before, but really have no exposure to what you're doing. And now they hear you proclaiming this ideology that, the church is not doing what it should, or isn't what it needs to be, those kinds of thoughts, because you're living in this whole new environment, and you're growing, but they're not. So what happened there?
Yeah. Well, actually, what I found, there was uh, the response was overwhelmingly positive and supportive and encouraging. They just loved what I was doing. They were, my family was so encouraging in every way. I became something of a, like, I don't know, family hero or something, because I'm
Wow.
off doing these great things. And
Great.
they would read the newsletters, and the way that, there's some things I've learned that I don't like so much now, but there's kind of a missionary way of, in order to raise money, you tell a great story, and somehow it does set you up on a little bit of a pedestal. And in some ways, like, vicariously, we care about the world through Don, but we don't really have to do that ourselves, because that's for those special people that go do these crazy things.
Right.
But in general, it was just always very positive. But I was growing, I was changing, my worldview was expanding, I was becoming less and less familiar with my own roots. And I lost my sister when she was 29, when she was 39. And so I came home from England in time to spend some time with her. And I remember her saying something that cut me pretty deeply. She said, when are you going to stop being ashamed of your background?
Wow.
And I didn't know I was conveying that. I didn't know that I was conveying, well, I've gone on, and man, it cut me, but it caused me, many years of reflection, that there are things that you have to move away from and dissociate yourself from, perhaps, in your growth trajectory. But if you don't reconcile those things, if you don't go back and reconcile them to who you really are, if they remain like oh, that was, but now it's a demonstration of kind of unresolved conflict and hurt. And so I did begin to, and now that's why I've done the research. I the fact that my grandfather, was was a very poor man, and the distance that we've traveled has helped me integrate my own passions, embrace my own roots. It deepens my credibility in this work, because I think I have made that reconciliation. So I would say my family was very positive until, and there was an until, when, and this until demonstrates to me the difference between compassion and justice. Compassion is about those needy people. Justice is about my role in that need and in that oppression or in that problem. I say, if you scratch compassion long enough, you will eventually find an injustice.
Yeah.
And when I was over there working with those poor Africans, it didn't matter that in that context, I was diving into policy issues, challenging governments, as you have to, as you're working in economic development, for example, and recognizing the corruption at every level in a struggling country, you end up challenging all the powers that be. But you're not doing that at home. When I moved on, and I spent especially the 3 years not too long ago as executive director of Red Letter Christians, working with Tony Campolo, Shane Claiborne, Lisa Sharon Harper, William Barber, these faith-oriented Christian, radical justice people, I felt like I was, but because we were looking at issues of, for example, policy about immigration and our treatment of people at the border, to me, they were just the same kinds of issues, but now they're politicized, and one group has one view and another group has another view. And so actually, my dad said to me not long ago that one of my uncles asked him, what happened to Donnie? So for me, I was just doing this same work.
Yeah.
But when you come home and now
Right.
you're it's not just off doing wonderful things among those people, but trying to seek change and justice at home, it gets a little personal. And that was more difficult, more challenging, but what actually helped me sharpen, like, sort of, what is my voice among those I don't agree with, or those I feel like need to be challenged, and how does Christ handle, what ways did he do that? And so yeah, the hero status until I brought something home.
It is so true. And I think it's one of the greatest challenges we have as followers of Jesus, even, and that is that, how do you disagree and passionately disagree, but honor the relationship with those that you love? With that,
Yeah.
we see that now more than ever in our political, environment, where families have been just cut in two and split, and we can't seem to have civility in our conversation. And there's a time to be assertive, and then there's a time to listen. And
Yeah.
so I think you're just spot on. I can't imagine you came back, tried to apply what you had learned and your thinking and your spirituality and who you are. You wanted to remain true to that, but then it causes some what happened
Yes.
to Donnie kind of
Exactly.
yeah, kind of.
Just to close that loop, the main lesson that I learned is actually, well, I won't go into its roots, but the punchline is retaining the humanity of your interlocutor or your opponent in your argument. That's, you see it missing today in
Yes.
demonizing the other. Maintaining the humanity, understanding the humanity of the other. I think that missionary background of contextualization, going to the Democratic Republic of Congo, trying to understand why there's so much violence, looking at the role of conflict minerals and how they're playing out in a context, and really making sure that you understand, or try to understand. They say your windowsill defines your worldview, or something like that. From where you are looking defines how you see the world, and
Yes.
maintaining the humanity of the other, even when they don't do that maybe for you, insisting on retaining their humanity and retaining your own in the process is, I think, at least an important element of how we engage in this civil strife and division that we do have now.
Well, it's incredibly important in creating unity as believers, and I think that's something that takes incredible maturity, not just emotional maturity, but spiritual maturity as well. And certainly you have demonstrated that, and as you have had these experiences, 80 something countries, amazing difference that you're making, come back and lead large organizations. Now you find yourself principal of a company, and tell us a little bit about that, and tell us a little bit about what your vision is for that,
Yeah.
for
Well,
Just
one
Capital.
of the organizations that I worked with, World Relief, is and was a pioneer in what we now know as microfinance. Providing small loans for mostly women, at least in its early days, women, people who are not banked, bringing them together and forming group collateral between the group, so each covers the loans when they can't be repaid, and then equipping those folks to do to use that money in a way to sustain themselves, and then building banks actually that make that work happen, microfinance institutions, MFIs. World Relief is a world leader in that work, beginning in the 80s in Bangladesh, where Muhammad Yunus, who pioneered the concept, began. Eventually, he would win the Nobel Prize, and microfinance, his book Banker to the Poor, would kind of blow this methodology up, and people would begin to learn about it. But I got to be involved in it for years, raise a lot of money for it around the world, help start some of the most thriving banks in Africa now, microfinance banks. I was involved in a few, one in Rwanda, one in Burundi, one in East Congo. And that, it's in my own experience, that was the most impactful, sustainable development I was ever a part of. I was involved in lots of great things, but none more sustainable, enriching, and empowering than microfinance. And then some of my colleagues that I worked with there at World Relief went on to pioneer other forms of economic development. savings clubs, which is sort of even closer to the poorest of the poor. Microfinance reaches not the poorest of the poorest of the economically active. Savings clubs have kind of gone even further down into poverty, but then going up towards basically starting purposeful businesses. And so many of my colleagues are now involved in all kinds of different aspects of what you might call impact investing or impact ventures, creating businesses that are worthy of investment because they're solving social and environmental problems. I have just some world-class colleagues that I call friends that are in these amazing places. So 4 years ago, after my time at World Vision, where I served for 3 years as Vice President of Church Relations there, I kind of wore out my own energy for raising money for large institutions, charitable institutions. And I thought, man, if that same amount of money that I've been involved in raising could help go into these business ventures, I think that would be good. And so that's how I made this sort of segue into impact investing, purposeful business. And I didn't know where it would lead, but it has resulted in a partnership, Just Capital Quotient. There are 4 partners, and we have 2 arms. We have a consultancy, and we have technically it's an investment club. These are folks that come together to work together and to share in the effort of how to use available capital to start or further purposeful businesses. So there's these 2 arms, the capital and the consulting. And on the consulting side, what has happened surprisingly is there are some major changes happening way above my head at the highest levels of the economy. An awakening that shareholder capitalism, Milton Friedman's view that the sole purpose of a business is to make a maximum profit for the shareholder. In 2018, the Business Roundtable, all the powerful CEOs publicly repudiated that our world cannot handle that view anymore. Larry Fink, the world's largest investor at BlackRock, his letter in 2019, A Fundamental Reshaping of Finance, where he basically said, if you aren't disclosing your environmental and your social profile, we will divest from you. That was huge. That shifted this conversation from the Birkenstock wearing hippie, like, maybe Jerry or
right.
what's the ice cream?
Ben and Jerry,
Ben and Jerry's. Those guys have been doing it, but this put it into the mainstream. And then in 2020, his letter comes out. People think maybe he's going to back away from this from COVID, and he doubles down. In fact, he provides statistics, and he says the businesses that are already disclosing have outperformed their sector on average by 65%.
Wow.
This is the future. So those are the economic trade winds, and publicly traded companies, they're already signaling their changes. Now, the cynic, just an aside here, the cynic can say, well, that's hypocrisy, that's virtue signaling, that's greenwashing. But I recently read this comment by my favorite Marxist, Slavoj Žižek. I always read this, what he writes, and he said that virtue always begins in hypocrisy. So we start talking about something we probably have no intention of doing or can't really attain to, and then 3 people start talking about it, and then one of them starts taking it seriously, and it begins to grow. So there are changes happening, and what has happened for us at Just Capital Quotient is that we have stumbled into the middle of a number of small and medium businesses who already have this passion, but they need a little help in one or all of these 3 areas. One is purpose. Like, we know we have a purpose beyond profit, but we haven't exactly integrated it into the warp and woof of our business planning, or necessarily it's implicit in our culture but not explicitly stated. So we try to help look at and draw out that purpose. Secondly is a much more technical area in either impact or sustainability. You could use either of those terms, but For example, whatever your business manufactures, learning it's the material impact of that process, of the life cycle of your product on the environment. Sometimes companies don't know, or they only know one thing. Maybe they only know the positive thing, or maybe they only know the negative thing. They don't know the whole life cycle. So sometimes a company wants to sort of go out and say, hey, we're doing good for the environment, but they're a little worried, well, what about the things I don't know? So doing an audit, doing a sustainability and impact audit, making sure it's like before you want to run a marathon, maybe go to your doctor and see what your own health is.
Right. Makes sense.
What areas do you need to work on? So we do these sustainability audits. How are you treating people and the planet, and how can you quantify that? And then stand behind it if you were ever to be challenged, or you uncover risks and you uncover opportunities. And then the third area is design or communication. How do you communicate out to your constituents, stakeholders, customers, your purpose and your commitment to people and the planet? So that's what JCQ, Just Capital Quotient, is doing. And I never thought I would know, for example, about foam polyurethane spray. These, so not, for example, this is it's almost like being back in Vienna and learning about Kosovar Muslims living in Yugoslavia, just learning all these important things. So this SPF, this spray polyurethane foam, it's a white substance that gets sprayed on top of industrial roofs. Big deal. But if you come to learn that the number 3 thing that goes into landfills is roof tear-offs.
Wow.
And these white roofs, so we have this company that we connect with called White Hat. They put this spray on. You don't have to do the roof tear off. Your roof goes from black, which collects heat during the summer, to white, which reflects the heat and brings your energy costs down. It's amazing, just finding the things that you do or can do to improve your impact in the world. We help companies discover those things, understand how they relate to their market, and communicate on that.
It's amazing, and we're going to put some things in the show notes so they can connect with JCQ. We want to get you connected. What a great organization you're partnering and the principal in. It's amazing, and it's exciting to think about that, not just individually, but corporately. As a global economy, people are beginning to pay attention to things that matter and to have a business on purpose. And
yeah,
I
that's
love
right.
that. And that's a whole nother conversation that we can have, Don, and maybe we will, about what's driving that, and even down to recruiting and the millennials coming in, and those under them are saying, you better have a social purpose. And we see that in our business as well, as we deal with Fortune 100 companies and all the way down to small entrepreneurs. I love that purpose-driven business. And so we want people to be connected. I could talk to you forever, but we need to draw this thing to a close. So I want to do this. I want to ask you a question and get your wisdom as a leader. If there's a young leader, young Don or young Diane, and right now they're listening to you and they're saying, man, I'm trying to figure out, maybe I'm in college, maybe I'm out of college, maybe I'm just in the workforce, but I need to get this thing figured out in my life. I'm an aspiring young leader. What 2 or 3 things would you tell them that they really need to focus on in order to find their purpose and to find what they need to be doing in their life?
Yeah, well, I happen to be working with a lot of people right now on that very question. And so to me, there's a pattern that has emerged in these conversations, and it's threefold. And number one, well, before the 3, is the general idea of faith. Whatever your religion is, your knowledge that you are more than your body, that life is more than material, that there is an essence, a substance of you that defines who you are. For me as a Christian, that is, where I play host to God, to the divine. And that is a very important thing. If profit isn't your God, what will be? So you got to tap into something that's bigger than yourself. And so it raises the issue of spirituality, your own spiritual practice, your own path. And when you have that, when you feel like you have that, then there's really 3 stages, I think, that we go through. The first is contemplation. That's really just getting quiet enough, regularly enough, to understand who we are and the world we live in, and really just knowing ourselves and the world and our moment in history. And then out of that, step 2 is the intention. With who I am and who the world is and what its great need is, and what my best gift is, what would I like to do? What would I like to in 150 years, what world do I hope is there when I'm gone? And what can I do? What intention can I set to be part of making that world a reality? And then the third is manifestation. When the intention of your heart is true and has integrity, then the book by Paulo Coelho, The Alchemist, he says that the universe conspires to help us. And so when you know yourself, when you set an intention that's true and has integrity. I'll give you an example of one that's not. I'm 54. I really need a red convertible to make myself most appealing for a future wife, or I need another business card that says VP of, because my ego needs that. That's a false intention. That's an intention that's coming out of your false self. And you can want those things. That's not the issue. It's just not your sole purpose. So when your intention flows with integrity out of your true purpose that you've found in your time of quiet reflection, then we can begin to celebrate when that call comes, or when that person you meet, when that business card appears in your hand. Those things begin to happen, and then you begin to know what to go with. And so we set an intention, and then we live our lives in gratitude as that intention begins to be made manifest, and we celebrate our role in building a better world.
Wow. Don, thank you. Well, this is amazing. We should just keep going. I could learn from you all day long, but
it's fun. It's fun, Larry. Appreciate your curiosity, and again, that awesome smooth as silk Southern accent. I love it.
Yes, I have to own that. What did you just taught me? I've got to be proud of my roots, man, and my past, and
double down
reconcile on that. That's exactly right. You are something else. That brain of yours is quite amazing, and thank you for sharing it with us. I hope that we will convince you to come back and let's do this again. And
I'd love to
learn from you,
Larry.
I want to thank you for your time. Thanks for this conversation. Just an incredible leader. Truly, you are making a difference, Don Golden. Thank you for all you're doing.
My pleasure, Larry. Good to be with you. Take care.